Hi everyone, welcome to the devrellers-meetup. Thank you for coming here as well. So today we are at the most amazing and terrific DevRelCon, which is really exciting, and they allowed us to use a space here and welcome some of the attendees of DevRelCon to come along as well. Welcome everyone online as well, and a big welcome to Emily Omier, who is joining us tonight to give a talk on giving people a reason to join your community. Emily is really amazing. I've been working with Emily for a number of years. She's a really brilliant positioning consultant and has done lots and lots of really good and valuable stuff with communities. So I'm very excited that she's here. I'll let Emily introduce herself in a moment. Just quickly the agenda. We'll first have Emily's talk. And then that's about half an hour, and then we will have a live Q&A, which will be facilitated by Peter-Rodger, who is here tonight as well. And there's Emily. Hi, Emily. How are you?
Hi, I'm doing great.
Thank you for joining us. Richard here, who runs the DevRel meetup in Dublin, and Graham here tonight as well, who will both help us with the Q&A. We have a URL for posting questions for everyone online, and we will, of course, ask anyone here for questions as well. So if you want to ask questions for Emily, please use this URL. And now I'm going to hand over to Emily. Hi, Emily. How are you?
I am doing great. Thank you so much for inviting me, Wendy.
Thank you very much for joining us tonight. How's Paris at the moment?
It's hot, but otherwise it's good.
That's great. Yeah, it's very, very hot here as well. Very nice weather. But everyone here, about 150 people, I think, today here at DevRelCon, decided to learn lots about building communities and stuff inside this building rather than, sunbathing outside with their sunglasses on. So very excited to have you here. Maybe you could give us a brief introduction about yourself, and then we can go to your talk.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm talking about giving people a reason to join your community, which is basically building the go-to-market fundamentals for your community as if you were thinking about your community as a product, which is how I think companies or anybody who's building a community should really think about their, if they're serious about community building, think about building out go-to-market fundamentals the same as you would for a product, positioning and all the other components of go-to-market fundamentals. So I'm Emily. Actually, I have a little bit about me here on the next slide, so I'll already go there. I'm a positioning and go-to-market consultant for open source startups. And so I'm going to compare the positioning and go-to-market components that you do for a product and sort of how you apply that to communities. And that's the kind of thing that I do with companies. I also host a podcast that is about the business of open source. It is called The Business of Open Source because I got really creative with the name. And I've also just finished writing an ebook on positioning open source projects. It's not available yet, but it should be next week. So if that is something that interests you, sign up for my newsletter or send me an email, be in touch, and we'll get it to you. So I'm going to go ahead and dive in case, unless anyone wants to say anything before I do so. Good. Excellent. Cool. All right. So let's do this. Oh, interesting. I just realized I didn't update the photos on my slides. Well, that's okay. We have a baseball field on this slide. Okay, so let's start about why we care, or start by talking about why we care about communities. So if you have a company and you're going to invest time, money, human resources into something, it should have a business outcome that you expect to get in return. So you don't want to just say we're going to build a community because we think communities are cool. You want to think of, we're building a community because we expect to get XYZ out of it in terms of business outcomes. So here are a couple of reasons that you would want to build a community, because communities do take investment, right? It takes money, it takes time, it takes people. First of all, building a community sort of at its core is about building a team of evangelists that you don't pay. So if you have one of your, somebody on your DevRel team goes to a conference and gives a talk about how awesome your product is, it's good, but everybody who's in the audience is going to be like, aha, I know that you are getting paid to talk about how awesome that product is, or how awesome that project is if it's open source. On the other hand, if you have somebody who's a member of your community who gives that talk and is not getting paid by you, that gives your company, your product, your project 1,000 times more credibility. And that's a huge part of what building a community is all about. Community, when it's done right, can be a competitive moat. Not all communities are like this, but because building a community is hard, and building a community means, getting people to be really emotionally invested in your company and in the mission that you're building towards. It's hard for a competitor to come and rip off your community. And so that it makes your company have a competitive moat that goes above and beyond whatever's in your product. And then another reason that community can be really important is for a feedback loop. When you have an active community of people, they're engaged, they're coming into your Discord or your Slack, they're showing up at events, it is much easier to get feedback. You can even get things like code contributions. But the point is, a real community is going to tighten your feedback loop and make it so that you don't have to go chasing after things like user interviews to nearly the extent that you have to if you don't have an active community. So these are a couple of the things that community does, right? It builds your lead funnel, basically, makes your marketing more effective, makes your product better, and long-term, it makes your business sustainable and able to withstand competitive pressures in the long term. Communities are awesome. Okay, but here's the thing that I think a lot of companies get wrong about building a community, even from the get-go, is that your community must add value that goes above and beyond whatever value people get from your product or from your open source project. This goes for whether we're talking about a software product, which is what everyone in the room is marketing, but it is just as applicable to a community that's built around a consumer product. If the value that you get from riding a motorcycle is not the same as the value that you get from hanging out with a motorcycle club and riding a motorcycle with lots of other people. So you have to be aware that in order for your community to function, it has to add value. And here's the thing, when I talk about like marketing fundamentals or go-to-market fundamentals, what it is figuring out what that value is that you're providing, and then making sure that you're talking about it so that you can attract the right people who are going to get the value, who are going to appreciate it, and that's going to create a positive feedback loop. Okay, so before we start talking about go-to-market fundamentals for communities, let's also talk about what you want from your community. One of the challenges when we talk about marketing things like communities, this is the same when we talk about like evangelizing open source projects, is that it's not quite as simple as evangelizing a product. So when you are creating a go-to-market plan for your product, your end goal is increased profits and increased revenue, increased profits. Like you're not going to get like a huge deviation from those goals when you're talking about, building a commercial product. But communities can have a lot of different goals. I mean, I just gave you a couple of reasons why you might want to build a community, and you want to know, like, do we care primarily about the feedback aspect, or do we care primarily about the evangelism aspect? Which of those is more important? And it's also important to be aware the communities are made up of different type of participants. And just like you have like an ICP for your product, you're going to have I call it an ideal member profile. You're going to have an IMP of ideal member profile, but it's going to be different if you're thinking like we want more people who attend our meetups versus we want more people to start hosting meetups. Those are different profiles of people. You do want to obviously have a process to help people maybe go from one level of engagement to the other, but you also need to be aware, like, okay, this thing that we're doing is aimed at getting people to attend their first meetup or ask their first question in Slack. And this thing that we're doing is aimed at getting people to answer a question in our Discord. So different things. And then lastly, like, be explicit and clear with yourself and your team about what you expect your community to contribute to your business. If you do not know what the goal is, you probably won't meet it. And if you do meet it, it'll be by accident and you won't be able to replicate it. So start out at the beginning when you're thinking about the community, or now, by being really explicit about, okay, the thing that's important about this community is X. Here's the outcome that we want it. Here's how we want this community to contribute to our business. Okay, so before we dive into go-to-market fundamentals for communities, let's review go-to-market fundamentals. I know this is probably super basic to everyone, but it's worth going over because this is what I'm going to talk about. And I think you'll probably find like some differing opinions about everything that should go into go-to-market fundamentals. This is what I think is really important to be clear on. So the first thing, your core positioning. I'm a positioning consultant. This is what I help people get to. So you want to know your market category. What is the slice of the market that you are absolutely able to dominate? You are absolutely the best option for, and you're very confident that this is, you know, like, if somebody in this market is going to compare you with all the other options, you're the very clear winner. So that is your core positioning. You want to have that for your community. Well, we'll get there. It's actually pretty easy. Everything else might be hard though. Next is competitive alternatives. So when you're thinking about your product, when you're thinking about your community, what are the things that people are doing in order to get the same outcome that they might get from using your project, or approximating the same outcome? So when we're talking about a product, this might be things like doing a manual process or hiring a couple more people. And then when we're talking about a community, it's something completely different. Next, you want to know what pain points people have. When you're building out a marketing or a sales campaign, you want to base it on talking about pain points very frequently. So you want to be really clear about what pain points people are experiencing that your community can alleviate, at least partially. You want to have unique values or unique selling points. What is the unique value that your community brings to the table? What makes it unique from other communities? What makes it unique from just downloading your project or swiping a credit card and using your product and like going about my business and never interacting with anybody else who's associated with the company or who also uses this project or product? Then you want to know your ideal user or your ideal customer profile. In the community case, your ideal member profile. And then you want to know your search and purchase triggers. So what happened that changed things so that somebody decided to go look for a project or a product that would do the thing that you do? What happened that made somebody decide that now is the moment that I'm going to become active in this community? And then last, I should have put this last because I think it's definitely not least, but I think it's a really good thing that a lot of companies miss is your point of view. And this is particularly important for communities, but has a slightly different role in go-to-market for communities as it does for your company. So you want to know what your project or your product or your company's point of view in the marketplace is. So when I say point of view, I mean an opinion, one that reasonable people can disagree about, that you hold as a company, that's reflected in how your product or how your project is built, And that is going to attract people who agree with you and make people who don't agree with you go away. All right, we're going to talk about all of these things in more detail right now. Okay, we're starting with the easy stuff. We're actually ending with the easy stuff. Market category. This is a really hard thing to do when you're positioning a product. It's super important. It's really hard. It's like art and science. But when you're positioning a community, like at the end of the day, it's a community. You do get into nuances, right? When you're like, this is a community for people who want to do X or for people who believe Y. But fundamentally, you are building a community. So yay, check this box. We're done. Now we're going to talk about USPs. USPs are, you're not done. You have to think about this. So I want to just make everybody think a little bit about the difference between a product USP and a community USP. So here's some examples of why somebody might use a product. They might want to increase their development velocity. They might want to get their new developers up to speed more quickly. They might want to increase their application security. I mean, there's like a million reasons why you could use a piece of software, but these are some sort of like classic examples from the dev tool space. These are generally not the reasons why people join communities. If you want to increase your application security, the first thing that you would want to do is probably not like go join a Slack group, although it can be related. So instead, when people think of the motivation for joining a community, we're thinking more often, first of all, like very individual characteristics. And then second of all, they're different. So you join a community, again, no matter what kind of community, because you want to feel like you belong, because you want to feel less alone. I'm betting very few developers are like, I've been feeling really lonely and like isolated at work, so I'm going to go download a cloud security product. No, they don't. But they might think, I'm going to go get involved in this Slack group, or you know what? I've been feeling really isolated, and so I'm going to go to this meetup that's related to this work that I've been doing. So feeling like you belong is a really important part of community. Even like doesn't matter how technical your product is or whatever. It's that is what communities are all about. But there's some other like specific things that people can get from communities. You can gain skills. These are really common reasons why people join communities. Gain skills, they can find a mentorship, become a mentor. Now, then sometimes it's not just individuals who want to be involved in communities, it's organizations. Sometimes organizations make a concerted effort to be part of a community because they want to guide the conversation around a particular topic. This could be individuals too, but you're going to see it a little bit more when it's like organizations that have like a formal relationship with a community. And it can be also because they want to influence the project or the product roadmaps. They want to like really be part of guiding this project, and they see becoming part of the community, becoming really active as a way to do that. So it becomes like a much more active relationship as opposed to just a passive like, oh, you did a new release, I wonder what's in it. Oh, interesting. So these are some things that people get from your community that they will not necessarily get from your product. And if you're thinking about growing your community, you need to be talking about these things that are in the community column. If you just say like, join our community and you'll get exactly the same things that you got from just using the product without joining our community, it's not going to be nearly as compelling. Okay, so what are the alternatives? I mean, once you think about those USPs, then we can really start thinking about what the alternatives are. Product alternatives, making generalizations here, but often they're going to be things like we can use a general software product. Like we used to track XYZ in Excel, and now we have a specialized software for doing that. Obviously, you could use a competitor's product. We're talking about dev tools, most of us. That means that most people's audience have the ability to roll their own, to DIY it. And that's a really serious competitive alternative for a lot of developer tools companies. And then obviously, like you can do nothing. That's always an option. Completely different competitive alternatives for a community. I mean, if you think of the competitive, like what could you have done on a Thursday night instead of coming to this meetup or watching this live stream? That is a competitive alternative to this to this meetup, to this community that you're a part of. And here's some other things. If you're feeling lonely, like maybe you find a mentor at work or through some other avenue that's not this community. Maybe you join a professional organization. Maybe you take up a hobby. You do something that's completely unrelated. That could be a competitive alternative for somebody to being more involved in your community. It could be take a course. Now, again, the thing that's really critical here is that understanding which of those USPs for the community are most important to the type of people who are most likely to be part of your community, which you only know if you ask them, is really important to then understanding what are the competitive alternatives. So you want to make sure that you're in communication with people who you think would make good community members if you don't have a community at all, or who already are good community members if you do have a community. And you're making sure to get feedback, not just about your product, but also about your community, and understanding like what are you getting out of this community? How could we make this community better? What's really important to you about being a member of this community? Then on the bottom here, we just have some examples of competitive alternatives that an organization could get, like investing massively in thought leadership on a topic instead of becoming a member of a community and sort of trying to guide the conversation from inside a community. Okay, so pain points, again, totally different. Your product pain points could be something like high churn in your engineering department. Your community pain points could be feeling alone, feel like it's really hard to learn a new technology. Another thing that I think it's not appreciated enough is that sometimes you have a problem space that's larger than one company. And this is when you have like groups of companies that come together to work on a problem together. And this could be spearheaded by one organization or not. But if other people are feeling like, no, this is a problem space that, nobody is going to get a competitive advantage from solving. This is the case often for things that touch security. No one's going to get a competitive advantage from solving this, but as an industry, it's something that we need to figure out. And that can be a pain point that causes people to become, or causes organizations to become members of a community. Okay, so let's talk about product ICPs and community IMPs. So first of all, I'm just going to go on a small tangent about ICPs. ICPs should always be specific to your product, which in the case of probably everybody who's listening is going to be a B2B product. And things like the age or whether or not the person has kids, or even their like disposable income is going to be really irrelevant. There's a lot of marketing books out there that are like, here's how to write an ICP. And it's like based on a bunch of consumer data. That's not what you want. But a product ICP is going to be like, we will use a certain tech stack. Maybe you have like a certain number of years of experience, or the reverse, like you're completely inexperienced. There's products that are best for both of those markets. Your community ideal member profile is going to always be a subset of your product ICP. So you can sort of, once you've taken your product ICP, you already know what those characteristics are. Then you can focus on your community, like out of those people, what is going to make somebody a really good candidate for being a member of our community. And it's also really important to think about, when you're thinking about product ICPs, you want to think about characteristics of individuals. And then you also want to think about characteristics of organizations. So this is the type of organization that's going to get the most value out of my product. This is the type of person. And usually the type of person might be like they're responsible for a certain outcome, Sometimes it's even, that they have a certain value system, but often it's just that they're responsible for a certain outcome. They use a certain tech stack, sometimes related to job title, but I like to be a little bit more specific than job title. And then you also have your organizational things that can be like, somebody who are organizations in a certain industry or under certain regulatory requirements, things like that. When you're thinking about ideal member profiles, the thing that is most important is individual characteristics. Because yes, organizations can be members of a community, but usually the sort of first push for most communities is getting individuals to become individually active in your community. So think mostly about things that are characteristics of an individual. And that means that you're going to be thinking a lot about like psychosocial characteristics. Somebody who's like, a real privacy crusader, for example, might be a good candidate for certain communities. When you're thinking about organizations, and then another thing that could be like an individual characteristic is like people who are the only person in their job title at their organization. That's probably somebody who's feeling a little isolated and alone, so they'd probably make a good candidate for your community. But you can also think about, I would say, like your second priority when thinking about ideal member profiles is thinking about those organization characteristics. And when I think of an organization as being a member of a community, it's still usually a person who's the representative. The difference is that if that individual were to move to a different job, the organization would replace that emissary into the community. Whereas when being a member of this community is an individual initiative, if that individual moves to another company, they usually would stay as member of the community. It just like now they've moved to a different job. And the organization, the original organization, wouldn't necessarily replace them. Okay. So purchase triggers, joining triggers. Purchase triggers are usually things like downtime incidents and missed product launches, things like that. Joining triggers, completely different. A really classic one for becoming, at least somewhat active in a community is like somebody's looking for a job. They have a problem with the product or with the project and they need help. Then if you're thinking about especially organizations, a lot of times it is related to an incident, not necessarily at that company though. Sometimes there will be an incident, like a security incident, for example, at a competitor, and it's like certain incidents are so bad that they don't make people think, oh, instead of using X in this market category, I'm going to use Y in this market category. Instead, they think, oh no, everybody in that market category is untrustworthy and I'm just not going to use them. So if something like that happens, that's a kind of thing that can really push people to join a community so that they can work together and make sure it doesn't happen again. Okay, so now we're ending on an easy note here. Your point of view is the same. So like I mentioned earlier, when I think of point of view, this is a strong opinion that you hold as a company and that reasonable people can disagree with. Maybe you think that, whether or not you think that they're completely reasonable, we can discuss that. But the point is, if you have a point of view that absolutely everybody is going to agree with, that doesn't count. But something that there's in the competitive landscape, there's disagreement about. You want to have that for your company, and you want to have that for your product. You want to have that for your community. Your point of view, and so some examples of points of view, they could be things like if you're building a product for data scientists, it should always be written in Python. It could be that developers should care about privacy above and beyond, or that the appropriate way to approach privacy isn't as a checkbox to avoid legal issues, but rather it's an ethical issue, and developers should be in control and understand the privacy implications of their work. It could be all sorts of things from, this is the most appropriate architecture for a product in our market category. And it can also be these sort of ethical concerns. Points of view are really critical for communities. I actually think this is probably the only example, the only go-to-market fundamental that is more important in evangelizing your community than it is in evangelizing your product. I think it's still really important in evangelizing products and building your name as a company. But when we think of the word community and what communities are, it fundamentally is a group of people that are like-minded, that share a point of view. And it's also, a group of people that share the same mission. And so you need to make it really easy for people to know what your point of view is and self-select in or self-select out. And this isn't necessarily going to make your community bigger. It is going to make your community stronger, because you want people to agree with you. You want people who are in your community to fundamentally agree with your core points of view about the marketplace, about the ecosystem that you operate in, and also fundamentally agree about the especially if you're in an open source component, in an open source context, you want them to fundamentally agree with your basic technical decisions. Otherwise, you're going to get into endless arguments. You want them to fundamentally agree with your ethical framework. You want them to fundamentally agree with what your mission is, because the community, you want people to all be going in the same direction and working on the same mission. And in order for that to happen, you have to make it really easy for people to understand what that mission is and understand what the points of view that they're buying into are when they become part of your community. So don't be shy about talking about your points of view. And people will disagree with you. That's okay. There's other places that they can go. In technology, there are disagreements. Doesn't make the other person an idiot or a bad person. It just makes it a disagreement, and it makes them not a great fit for your community. That's okay. It's not a great fit for everyone. So this is a Google Doc with a positioning canvas template. It is geared less towards communities and more towards products or open source projects. But based on everything that I've just talked about, you should be able to extremely easily adapt it to a community. So make a copy of that. And then there's boxes in that positioning canvas for, competitive alternatives, unique pain points. Fill that out. And once you do that, you will, once you have written down what you think the value that people get out of your community is, the pain points that your community is solving, just the act of getting that clarity is going to change the way that you talk about your community, the way you think about it, the way you talk about it, and share it with your team as well. If you want to take it even further, make sure that you do some conversations, do some interviews with people who are members of your community if you have one, and make sure that you're not just filling this out in a complete vacuum. But do that. It'll change the way you think about your community if you haven't done it before. And use that as you're building your evangelism efforts and working on getting the word out for your community. Okay, so that's it. We're ready for questions. You can see all the wonderful ways to get in touch with me. Feel free to send me an email or connect with me on LinkedIn, or just listen to my podcast anonymously. All of those are good.
Thank you. Thanks, Emily. Terrific. We've got one question here in the room as well. Nikita.
Nikita Koslev, OpenAK ambassador and few more ambassadors. What is open source startup?
What is
what
an
does it
open
actually
source
mean?
startup? That's kind of a can of worms. So here, I'll tell you what it means to me. What it means to me is a startup that is building their commercial product based on an open source project. And I think that what I would say is it's a company that has like a serious and existential relationship and investment in an open source project. They depend, like their business is intricately tied to an open source project. Usually there are different ways that open source startups can be set up, but usually it's, you know, the company maintains an open source project and then has some sort of commercial offering that's related. That's what I think of it.
Thank you. And to follow this up, am I audible? I'm not sure if I'm audible. Is it better now? Yeah. And to follow it up, what are the main ways for open source startups to actually make money? So what are the main business models?
Well, there's a couple things. First of all, you can sell services. Not everybody thinks that that's an excellent way to make money from an open source project. It's usually lower margins. You can have a hosted version of your open source project, and you can have an enterprise version that has the cliche to me is you have your open source project, you interact with it like on the command line, and then you have an enterprise version and it has a fancy UI, and like the business manager is going to be interacting it and like get reports about stuff. And then you're going to get that's not necessarily open source. But that's like a traditional open core approach. There's also some companies that will have an open source project, and then they'll have a related commercial offering that is, they're tied together, but they're not fundamentally providing the same outcome. And I actually think that's a really interesting model. So, for example, you might have an open source project that identifies vulnerabilities, and then you might have a commercial product that automatically remediates them. So they're related, but they do not provide exactly the same outcome.
Thank you, Emily. So now I'm going to bring Peter and Graham forward. I was looking over my glass in a really weird way. I think there's a few more questions I'm seeing coming in on online.
Hey, hello again, Emily. How are you doing? I'm gonna use my privilege of the microphone to ask my question first.
Okay.
Okay.
So, having started a number of meetups, I wish I'd seen this presentation many years ago. Some were successful by accident, and some were total failures. But they were all motivated by the decision to start a community. And my question is when? So if you are running a startup, you won't have a community manager on day one, but a community is presumably something, especially if you're doing open source, that you want to have active. So is it better maybe to identify existing communities that match the positioning, or wait until you have the resources to make it work?
I don't see any reason why you have to wait in order to start your community. In fact, as with a lot of things in positioning and go to market, you start and you're not really sure. You start with a hypothesis, and then as you get one or two people who are interested, who join your community, you talk to them. You get like maybe 3 or 4. You talk to them. You see what they say. You test your hypothesis. And then you can, then you sort of evaluate. I mean, it's like the thing about go-to-market fundamentals and positioning in general is, this isn't something that you go sit in your bedroom and are like, I wonder what this could be. Let me just, pull some things out of thin air. You have to be having interactions with people, and this is true in building a project. It's true in building a product. It's true in building a community. Possibly even more in a community, because communities are all about, like, the whole point is interactions. So if you are building a startup, or if you're building a community from scratch as part of your business, I would say you should think critically about all of these things from day one, but do not expect that you're going to like absolutely get it right. I do think that from day one, having an awareness that core idea, which is the value of your community is not the same as the value of using your product in isolation. If you are aware of like just that one thing, first of all, I think you're already ahead of the game. And second of all, I think you're setting yourself up to think about your community in the correct way. And then everything else, you make a hypothesis and then test it as you attract some people.
Thank you. Yeah.
Amazing. I'm going to save my questions for later. I love the question though. We've got one from one of many from Sue Shardlow. At the start, you said about one reason for a community is so you can have evangelists that you don't have to pay. But is this ethical, especially as many devs are not earning Bay Area salaries? I like that one. It's a tough one.
Is it ethical to have evangelists that you don't pay? I mean, I think so. I mean, don't you evangelize stuff that for products that don't pay you? I mean, I do. Whether or not I'm a member of their community or not, I think that like this is what word of mouth marketing is people evangelizing your product and you don't pay them. When somebody evangelizes your product and you're not paying them, that doesn't mean that they don't get anything out of it. So let's take that example that I gave of the person who is doing a conference talk that is related to your product or to your project. That person is like, they didn't like decide to do this conference talk because they're like, this company that isn't paying me, I really want to contribute to their business. No, they're doing that conference talk for some other reason. Probably like, I want to be better known in this field. I want to be seen as an expert. I'd like to increase my chances of getting a good job. There's something in it for them too. And that's the point. Like your community isn't about exploiting people. You have to provide value. Your community has to provide value, but there's a lot of ways to provide value that are not monetary.
Marvelous. So Suze came in with another question, which is a good one. So we'll keep going. Thanks, Suze. So how do you separate community management and DevRel from getting involved with tech support? They are different disciplines, but the community is going to get a lot of product questions.
That's an excellent question. And I'm not sure I have a really excellent answer to it. I think that is, so the first thing that's sort of separated out is usually if you are talking about a commercial product, the appropriate place for support to happen is in a more like formal setting. People are paying for your product, so there should be some way to get support other than asking a question on your Slack. But if you're talking about an open source project, you don't, well, first of all, like that is one of the functions of an open source community is to provide support. And I think that there's also, this is really nuanced, but it's because the support aspect isn't just about how do we like answer this one question, but it's, if you think about it more as like, how do I ensure that this person has a really good experience with our project? And then if you also think about, how do I build a more cohesive or a more robust community where it's not just our employees who are doing tech support, but people are helping each other. When somebody is asking a tech support question on your community, that's a really good information. And in fact, a lot of open source projects, I think, don't appreciate it quite as much as they should. They'll like, particularly if you think about contributions, they'll be like, oh, a contributor is somebody who like writes code and contributes it. But if you ask a support question in a Slack or a Discord, that's a type of contribution, because what it's telling you is either A, there's a bug, or B, there's something wrong with the user interface. And you're going to see patterns. I mean, so maybe sometimes you're going to get one person who has a problem, but often you might see repeated questions. And this is feedback. It's telling you, like, there's something wrong with your product. You should probably fix it. So I think, if you think of those support requests as more than just support requests, but rather like part of your feedback loop, it's a little bit more of a mindset shift than like a real tactical thing. But I think that helps reframe the relationship.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I once worked with a guy called Stanley. Unfortunately, I don't know his surname, but he was really, really brilliant in growing and creating a support community. And he really explained, like, it's about the experience for the person that asked the question, and if they perceive that there are people there to help them and to support them, and if there's a community there that they can rely on. But it's also an experience for the person who might be willing to answer that question. And they had some processes making sure that they wouldn't answer the simple questions immediately. They would wait so that people had an opportunity to answer that question, and only when questions weren't answered within a reasonable amount of time would they step in, and they would indeed also recognize patterns and share that with the product team, or with the docs team, or with the Q&A team, or things like that. Sorry to step in, but I loved this question.
No, perfect.
There's absolutely no need to apologise. I like that. We've got another one from VoxGig on the joining triggers bit. Non-tech company founders seeking help/team. Have you got any ideas on how to make it explicit that they are welcome?
Like how to make it explicit that somebody's welcome in a community?
I think it's more about explicitly showing that, hey, we're looking for co-founders, we're looking for people to join the company, we're looking for people to actually actively join the company. I think that's the gist of the question.
The hiring page? Is that what we're talking about? I mean, whenever you want to make something explicit, you make it explicit. It's like if you want to make somebody feel explicitly welcomed, like, it's super cliche, but they join your community and you're like, welcome, thank you for joining, Emily. Do you have any questions? If there's other things you want to make explicit, then people join your community and you're like, thanks for joining the community. Here's like a list of facts about the community. I mean, when you think about it, it's like you almost need docs for your community. This is how our community functions. This is what our community is all about. And that can also sometimes the code of conduct is a whole other thing. I'm just thinking about, like, this is the priorities of our community. This is how things work. This is the things that are important to us. I mean, yeah, if you want whatever it is that you want to make it explicit, just make it explicit. Put it out there.
Awesome. And just a minor point on that, I recently had a conversation with someone about, lots of communities have codes of conduct, but having a kind of code of values, which helps align people with what the community is about. And I think that's kind of where that question is going. So the next one we have is from Sarah Clark. What are some of the ways you can help community members grow and develop?
There's two ways that question can be interpreted. So the first one is, how can we help community members grow and develop as people or in their careers? And the reason I might be interpreting it that way is because that is one of the reasons that people join communities, particularly when we're talking like the types of communities that everyone here is running or is interested in. And then there's another one, which is, how do we encourage people to grow as community members? So how do we help somebody go from, person asking question to person answering question to person attending meetup to person organizing meetup to person, contributing code. So to answer the first question, That goes down to like comes down to what sort of events you're going to be organizing. There's all sorts of things like, do you have an explicit way to help people connect with others who are more experienced than them? Do you maybe have like some explicit links to educational materials? The second way to interpret that question, which actually is how I think the asker probably meant, is that there's a lot of talks out there that are about contributor ladders, which it's the same idea. And it really boils down to making it easy. So creating docs for your community, and creating docs for your software or your project is also a big part of that. In fact, I would say a big part of creating successful communities is having really good documentation just around your software, but also documentation, like I said, almost around your community. Like this is how things work in our community. Do you want to do X? Make it really easy to discover how someone can go from one sort of role in the community to the next. And then the last thing is ask people explicitly. Like if you see that there is somebody who has been really active in asking questions or just really active in making comments in the community, you can, actively ask them to become more involved. And they'll say no, and maybe they'll say no, that's okay. But if you sort of are proactively reaching out to people, that's a really good way to help them really feel seen, actually, and then also grow in their experience of the community.
Fantastic, thank you. Another one from Sue Shardlow. When is it appropriate to allow your marketing people to come and chat in your community platform?
Never. I don't know. I think that this is a touchy subject, and the way that I would put it is that I don't think your community should ever be seen as like just a bunch of leads. And if your marketing team is doing a good job and they're providing content and they're doing things that are in line with the values that people want from your community, then yeah, have them come whenever. But if you're going to have people that are coming into your community and their only goal is to upsell the community members, then never. Especially if we're in like an open source context, that's just like, it's such a taboo. And it will kill your community if people start to think that this is just it's sort of a faux community is what they'll think if it seems like it's just just for creating leads. I mean, the interesting thing is, like, you can get leads from your community. It absolutely happens. You can have people from an open source project converting to paid customers. That happens all the time. And if that's something you want to happen with your community, you should be intentional about it. But being intentional about it does not mean having your marketing team go in there and be like, hey, did you know for just $9.99 you could get XYZ functionality? I'm sort of exaggerating, but basically, you really don't want to make people feel sold to in your community, especially if it's an open source one.
So I totally and utterly agree with you, first of all. But I do think that sometimes it's helpful to have marketing people come and join us for a different reason, and that is to help us market our community or market our blog post. We just had an interesting talk about by Sneak in the closing keynote, where they explained there's no point in writing really good documentation or a fantastic tutorial or a really good blog post if nobody knows that it exists. So, and marketing people do sometimes know really good ways of how to maximize things on social media or things like that. So I think bringing marketing people in to help us reach out to the community with our content can be helpful. But the other way up, absolutely not. And I entirely agree with Emily.
I think there's the other way to think about this, though, and like another role that the marketing team can have in a community is the community is a really rich resource for feedback about what matters. and what doesn't to the people who are really invested in your product. And so marketing people should definitely be in your community. They should be there primarily to learn and to listen. And yeah, I agree with Wendy as well, like, and obviously to help you market your community. But marketing people being involved and being there to listen and learn, always a good thing.
So just so you know, we have 3 more minutes, but so we have time for another question, but just 3 more minutes and then we...
So one more question, which is close to my heart because I had a meetup that failed. This question is from Ngube Precious, which is, how do you deal with low interaction in a community?
Well, you can, the first thing is that you probably will get less interaction than you expect. There's a lot of communities that communities that I'm a member of, they'll have, hundreds of people and who are members, and there's only like 20 or 30 who are actually active in the community. So the first thing is just like a setting of expectations. If you have a community of 20 people, chances are low that you're going to get tons of interaction. But it's awkward, but it's also, as a community manager, it's your responsibility to try to plant the seeds for community, for interaction, and ask people, what are they working on? What are they struggling? Why did they join the community? And do your best to try to sort of foster that communication. It won't always work, but yeah, you have to try.
So thank you, Emily. You've been like absolutely amazing. Thank you very, very much for joining. And if you could send me the link to your sheet, because your canvas, because everyone here is very interested to see it, that would be great. And everyone, I'll tweet it on the @devrellers Twitter, and I will also put it below the YouTube video, which we'll post tomorrow. So it will all be there. So thank you also everyone here. Thank you everyone online. Particular thanks, of course, to Emily, but also to Richard and to Graham, who agreed to help me last moment, which is why he's not on my slide.
Got
but
bullied into it.
But got bullied into it. But your Twitter is
Graham the Dev.
Graham the Dev. If you and of course I want to thank the fabulous DevRelCon. We have been here in this room all day. It's a really, really brilliant conference, so make sure you don't miss the next one. They tweet at DevRelCon, so they will announce when the next one is there. And if you're excited, if you think you learned something, or if you want to give a talk, or if you want to contribute in any other way, the DevRel community is a broad community. There's lots of meetups, there's lots of conferences, lots of really good places to go. This meetup publishes its events on meetup.com/devrellers. The Dublin DevRel meetup, you can find their events at devrellmeetup.com. And then we also have a DevRellers community on LinkedIn, which is starting to get pretty active, so it's really quite nice place to be. With lots of valuable content from everyone, which is on LinkedIn/devrellers/community. And then, of course, there's developerrelations.com, which is the organization and a really brilliant website with articles, podcasts, things like that. And it's also the organization that organized DevRelCon. And therefore, if you have missed it this year, you can see all the videos there sometime in the coming weeks. And then there are some Slack communities that are really good as well, DevRel Collective and DevRelX. I find very useful. So I hope everyone had a good evening. Thank you all for coming, and thank you also for coming online, and I hope to see you next time. Thank you. Bye.